Hey everyone, today we're going to be talking about cattle panel garden arches, tomato trellises, and DIY vegetable cages. I'm also going to show you a few tools that you'll want to have handy for this job and exactly how we're going to use them. So let's get started. So back a few years ago, as we started to really expand our garden, we realized the expense of buying things like tomato cages and structures to try to contain our tomatoes. Now, we've always mostly grown very tall, indeterminate tomatoes, and we really just didn't understand why we could not secure them properly. So as we went on our quest to continue to invest money into structures that were not really supporting things properly anyway, we decided to make some changes. So you can see behind me here, I have a stack of your very standard cylindrical tomato cages with the spokes that go in the ground, and they have the rings around the middle, and you know, they're not really welded all that great. Then they tend to break apart and the rings fall off, and it's all very frustrating. And you know, something shaped like this is okay if you're doing a small Roma tomato, or you know, even your peppers need cages like this. Eggplants need cages like this. Everything needs some sort of support. A lot of people don't even know that you can grow your zucchini and squashes vertically through one of these cages just to keep them off the ground. So, you know, we quickly realized that we were spending in the area for the better cages up to $10 a cage for tomatoes. Now this year I'm growing 110 tomato plants. There's, I don't know, probably I'm going to require 200 caging systems just for round cages. Now you can do the math on that if we're spending, say, $5 to $10 a cage just to have the rings fall off anyway. So here's some things that we decided to invest in to not only get the best bang for our buck, but to have the proper structure, because it's so important that when you're growing these vegetables that everything is properly secured. Now, a day like today, we have a very large storm bearing down on us that's coming from the west-southwest. It spawns tornadoes everywhere. The wind is blowing so strange today through my house. I had to close the windows because the air is literally sucking the air out of the house. Is a very strange thing. It's very frightening. So today was the reminder that we needed to get started and getting our structures inventoried, and because we're making some changes out here, it's giving us the opportunity to show you exactly what it is that we are going to do. Now, as we grew our larger indeterminate tomatoes, as I was saying, we've always been fans of, you know, park swappers, and they were growing, I don't know, over 8 feet, and then they would start to grow down and wrap around themselves, and things would get crazy, and that was when our tomatoes would get sick. And you know, your tallest tomato cage after it's sunk down into the ground is only going to be maybe chest high. So that was when we said, what can we do differently to get our tomatoes up vertically? So, you know, I talked to my sister who grew tomatoes, and she showed me some ideas of how they built their tomato trellis structure, which was by using the pieces of wood vertically. We have them staked down through the ground, and then you just build a little top piece up there and connect it on, so that your vertical structure stays sound and even. Now we made sure to make sure everything was all connected at the top in a level way, and these are sunk down nice and far so that we can make sure that as the weight of the tomatoes grows, everything was supported. Well, as we started to expand everything, and this was before we actually had the concrete block bed put in, I want to say 5 years ago, we only started with a small portion of the structure. So we decided to, you know, look into other ways to support the tomatoes, because what was happening was they would grow up the post, but then they wanted to go wide and ramble, and they really didn't have anywhere to go. So as our ideas progressed, we started looking through YouTube for some ideas on how to better cage your tomatoes. And that was when I discovered Jessica Soward's and Roots and Refuge Farm. And it was like it was an incredible moment for me because all of a sudden I was inspired. We took the advice of Jessica and Maya, and they helped us, and it was incredible. So we realized that they were using cattle panel arches, and we watched them tamping the T-post down into the ground, and I was so excited. And you know, we ran out to our local Tractor Supply. I said, I have to have a cattle panel arch. I want it for my tomatoes, and I also want to have it to make arches so I can have some of these amazing Kajari melons. It totally inspired me to want to grow more things. So we ran off to our local Tractor Supply, and that was right around the beginning of the pandemic, and we saw the cattle panels. I was so excited. At that time, they were around $20 a panel. This year, they went up to around $40 a panel, so that's a fast forward to present. What we discovered immediately was that these cattle panels are very dangerous. They're very heavy. You can see here that they have sharp edges on them, and they can ruin your clothes. And if you don't want to show up in a Honda or a Tesla or something tiny and think that you're going to bring home cattle panels, because you're just not. If you don't have a flatbed truck, what they do is they fold them in half and they try to load them onto some sort of a trailer or something like that for you. But these guys are 16 feet long. So this is no joke when you invest in cattle panels. Now, these are our first actual cattle panels that we're using for a project today to replace some of the arches that we built with alternate material. So I'm going to go back in time again, and I'm going to tell you how we actually got started with what materials we used and how that progressed into great ideas, and it actually all worked out in the end very well. So this that you see here is a roll of gaucho. I'm going to show you a clip of it real quick when I'm done talking here. Gaucho 20 HS field fencing, okay, that we used instead. And the reason that we bought this was because there was no way we could get the cattle panel arches or panels home at 16 feet in my Honda CR-V. We were really intimidated. I was very sad and upset. So we opted to do this instead. Now, this roll, I think, was at least 100 feet long. It may be 200 feet long. I'm not really sure. 100 meters. So I think that's almost 300 feet. This cost a couple $100 actually. But like I said, when you start to invest in your basic round tomato cages and you have 100 tomatoes and peppers and all these things that need support, you're going to spend a couple $100. And you may do that slowly over time, but they break down and you're going to need to continue to replace them. We looked at this more carefully. There were options. You can get it in different gauges, different strengths. You know, they use this to fence in all sorts of farm animals, from small animals to larger animals. So you can buy it in different size gauges with different size squares. So I was happy with this. It was very heavy. John was able to lift it by himself because he's strong, but if you have a bad back, you're going to want to make sure you have somebody to get this in and out of your vehicle. This will require, if you're going to try to build trellises with it or arches, some sort of support. So as you roll it out, you can customize your length, and that's the beautiful thing about it. A 16-foot cattle panel is best used in a 16-foot length. So what we did in the beginning was we figured out, or we measured our length, and we cut the hog fencing down to the custom length of the trellis. And it was a matter of simply making some screws into the top and fastening it on. This was very, very simple. And I will tell you that the gauge is not as thick as an actual cattle panel, but it holds everything up perfectly. There's no issues with the tomatoes weighing it down because we have it secured onto the wood structure. So this is where it gets interesting. Now you can do 2 levels. We have ours starting up a few feet so that there's really nothing down low. We wait until the tomatoes are up at a certain height before we want to clip them off. So now we have the opportunity to use clips or soft ties or whatever once the tomatoes start coming up their supports and they start to reach out, we're able to clamp everything down here. We've never had a problem with this since we put it up. Everything stays up, it doesn't fall down. It's been incredible. So I decided at that point that since I didn't have my cattle panel arch, I was going to go ahead and cut a piece of it by myself, and I was going to make my very first arch. I did this by myself. It worked out great. I was very, very proud of myself. I even put in the T-post by myself and I tamped them down, which brings me to, in a moment, I'm going to show you some of those tools that you're going to need that I told you about a moment ago. Now, something like this, if you're going to use it with T-posts, you can also buy these at Tractor Supply, and they come in several sizes. Remember this is important. When you buy T-posts, included are these clamps. Okay, I'm going to turn the camera around and show you. These clamps here are included when you buy your T-post. Some people don't remember. Sometimes the guys in the supply yard forget to show you that you get these included, but these connect on and they hold up so that this is what keeps your fencing pulled close to the T-post. So you're going to want to remember these. But if you're using repurposed T-posts, if someone gave them to you, you found them on the side of the road, you don't have the clamps, you can go buy those clamps, or you can use lock ties. You just have to remember that over time, the lock ties are going to break down and snap. Now, here's the pros and cons of having something like this and using the hog fence as a garden arch. It works out great for things like pole beans, for climbing vines like the butterfly peas, anything that is fairly lightweight. It was my goal to use these for Kajari melons, and it worked out great until the Kajari melons got to the top. And once they started to weigh down, what happens is the weight brings it down and it starts to buckle. Now, you can still use this if you can't get a cattle panel home. It's as simple as getting some flexible PVC. You don't want to get it too thick, so you can create an arch with it, and you would just attach PVC, cut to the size of your T-post, let them bend and arch up, and that will hold the top of your arch in place if you can't get an actual cattle panel home. That's something that you can do to build an arch with hog panel. Now, as I started to get creative with those things, and our tomato cages were breaking at the time, my ideas hadn't evolved to this at that point. I said, you know what? I'm going to make my own cylindrical tomato cages. So this tomato cage here, you can see, was very, very simple to make. I just figured out how big I wanted it to be. I cut it to size, and when you cut it, this I'm going to turn the camera around and give you a closer idea. This is where you're going to cut your pieces in order to create this here, where I've used these as connectors. So if you snap this in half all the way down at the place that you want your length to be, it then just folds in half on itself, so you can use the actual pieces of extension here. Let's see, here's a better one. So you see, when we cut it here, this was half of the square, and then you just fold it around on itself, and now you have a cage. So the wonderful thing about this is if you have a very, very tall indeterminate tomato, you could stack these on top of each other, tie them off with lock ties, and now you've got a custom height tomato cage, and it can be as narrow or wide as you need it, and this worked out perfectly. Now, last year we started our little berry, we call our little berry barn here. We were doing blueberries and rambling blackberries, and we realized that we had to cage the blackberries in, or they had nowhere to go vertically. So we came up, we had so many ideas, we were so frustrated. I went ahead and used the same tomato cage idea, and I just cut it to the size of the pots, and I put it around the blackberries, and now they grow beautifully up the same cylindrical cage here. So now it's not just a tomato cage, it's a berry cage. It can be, like I said, for zucchini or eggplant or peppers, however big you want it to be. But it holds everything up. The squares don't collapse. Here's another way that I used it here on the horizontal. So this is for cucumbers. It does great with cucumbers. So you can see how sturdy it is. And again, we just connected it to the T-post. And over here, I grow a whole entire variety of its own of cucumbers. I did use it for cucumbers in its arched application, and I'm going to take a walk back and show you what happened with that. So here's another area where I grow my Marketmore cucumbers and my Dragon's Egg cucumbers. And again, I just drove in my T-post to the bed. I generally make these arches about 16 feet long, the same as the actual cattle panel. And it worked out great until the cucumbers got to about here. And I'll tell you, it was pretty cool because they would connect on and they would hang down, and it almost had the same effect of Kajari melons, except that it's cucumbers, and the cucumbers were very happy. The problem is once they hit here, this started to happen. So I said, okay, I can do the PVC method if I really want to, but if it really, you know, if we had to, we were prepared to do it, but the plan changed. So I gave my friend an idea about building arches with cattle panels in her yard or using the hog fencing to create it, and she decided she wanted the cattle panels. They had access to a trailer, so they were able to go and get actual cattle panels, and she said, Leigh, we're going to pick up cattle panels, do you want some? So I said, I absolutely do. So now instead of reinforcing the hog panels for my cucumbers, I got 3 cattle panels that we'll be replacing, so that on the cucumber arches they will be actual cattle panels going into place, and then I'm going to repurpose the arches to use for more trellises. Another way that I used the trellises was for my snap peas that climb up here. And again, when you cut it in half and it leaves spikes, you can just drive that right straight down into the ground, and it secures itself down. Now, here's a whole pile of the tomato cages that we built. So you can see, I mean, they're so easy to make. We made like a dozen of them in no time flat. Once you realize how many squares you have to cut down to, and you snip them in half, and then you start folding them over, and you create your own cylinders. They just stack up, and you can put them wherever you want to, and before you know it, you've got an inventory of vegetable cages. Now, just like any other cage, you really want a center support. So what we do here is we have pieces of wood, or you can use the sticks that you buy, the tomato stakes, and anything that's going to go down into the middle. I offset the post so that the post actually sits in the back of the cylinder, and I attach my cylinder to that so nothing moves. And then you'll see as your tomato starts to train up, in my experience, actually, I've realized it's better to have multiple stakes or sticks inside of your cylinders, even with your standard tomato cage. It just helps everything to be able to tie off, so that as your tomato leans, once everything's inside of a cage, it's really hard to get in there and start modifying it. So I offer several points of support in the tomato cages with sticks and stakes and things like that, but it gives you the opportunity to tie off your cage to one of those stakes down in the ground so that everything stays upright and stable. So now I'm going to show you a couple tools that we use in order to make the structures happen and get them staked down into the ground. So the 2 most important tools that you're going to need when you're working with hog panel, that the hog panel is going to need to be cut. You have to remember it's going to be at least 100 to several hundred feet long. This is a wire cutter that I bought at Lowe's. It's a basic Craftsman. The different wire cutter options will tell you how big of a gauge it will actually go through. So this is what we use to cut the actual hog panel to its desired length. This tool here, this is your post driver or your post tamper. I'm not really sure what the actual name of it is, but this is what you're going to use to drive your T-post down. So it makes a whole lot of sense to invest in this, because if you try to hammer these T-posts in, it's very jarring on your body. It will take you 20 times longer. Using this to just drive your T-post down, they go down very, very rapidly with a couple big tamps, and this is worth an investment. I think this is in the $30 range to purchase. If you're going to be moving your arches around or building a lot of arches, it might just be worth it for you to go ahead and invest in this tool, or maybe you know someone that you could borrow it from if they will let you. The wire cutters, I feel like they already paid for themselves, so they came in different prices and different quality, like I had said. So it depends on what your budget is and how much you can actually spend. But I would encourage that if you're actually going to invest in something like this anyway, you want to have good tools for it, because the initial investment of this garden really does start to add up. And there's a joke going around that, you know, guys, if your wife likes handbags and shoes, but you better hope that she doesn't start to like gardening, because gardening can be expensive, but it shouldn't be intimidating. There are options for every budget that you might have, which is why we said, okay, we can do these projects and try to get cattle panels delivered, or buy a whole stack of cattle panels. And based on the amount of wire we have already used in the past few years, it would have been hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars. Instead, by using initially the hog panel, it saved us a lot of money just on DIY tomato cages alone. So if this is your first time stopping here at our channel, my name is Leigh, and that's Farmer John in the background there. If you like this type of content, we sure hope that you'll consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Coming up in the next video, we're actually going to show you how we replace the existing arches that are made from hog panel, and we'll be putting up the cattle panel so you can get a better idea. But for now, we're going to end this video as it is. Thanks for stopping in to see us, you guys, and we'll see you in the next video.